This is Harrods, a luxury department store in the heart of London. To most people, it looks unmistakably British. The green awnings, the historic architecture, the doormen, the wealthy shoppers leaving with signature paper bags. It feels like the kind of place that has always belonged to Britain's old upper class. But surprisingly, Harrods is not British-owned. In 2010, it was acquired by Qatar Holding, the investment arm of Qatar's sovereign wealth fund. And Harrods isn't the only example. If you look across the city, you will notice the same pattern. The Shard, the wider Shard Quarter, luxury hotels, office towers, even airport stakes, parts of London that feel deeply British, yet whose ownership ultimately traces back thousands of miles away to Doha. Now, Qatar doesn't own London. To be clear, that would be an oversimplification. But in some of the city's most valuable and symbolic landmarks, Qatari capital has become impossible to ignore. For centuries, London projected British power. It stood as the capital of empire, finance, monarchy, law, and trade. Its buildings reflected who ruled, who owned, and who mattered. But in modern London, ownership is much harder to recognize. The name on the building may be British, the street may be British, the history may be British, but the money behind it may come from a sovereign wealth fund. It often moves through holding companies, law firms, and asset managers. By the time you follow the ownership trail, the owner is no longer a local family, a British company, or even a conventional investor. At first glance, this seems like nothing more than a real estate story. Wealthy oil and gas nations buying safe assets in London. But the deeper you look, the more you realize this isn't just about real estate. Gulf state-backed capital is buying into many of the systems that helped shape Western power. Culture, sport, airports, gaming, electric vehicles, artificial intelligence, and the industries expected to matter long after oil. Let's begin with London because it offers the clearest example. It's old, wealthy, global, and obsessed with property. It's also one of the easiest places in the world for foreign capital to blend in without attracting much attention. Qatar's expansion into London wasn't accidental. It targeted assets with prestige. Harrods represented British luxury. The Shard became an icon of the modern skyline. Luxury hotels became part of the city's social fabric. These assets aren't simply buildings, they're signals. For a sovereign wealth fund, a landmark property serves multiple purposes at once. It can preserve national wealth, it can hold value outside the Gulf, it can generate steady income, it can create prestige, and it can embed a small nation into the everyday life of one of the world's most influential capitals. This is the first rule of sovereign wealth. A building is never just a building. If a billionaire buys a tower in London, it's simply a wealthy individual making an investment. But when a state-backed fund buys that same tower, the meaning changes. The asset may still be commercial, legal, and profitable, but it can also become part of a much broader national strategy. A typical investor wants a financial return. A sovereign wealth fund wants that too. But it may also be seeking influence, access, security, prestige, and long-term survival. For many Gulf governments, the logic is straightforward. Oil and gas created their wealth, but oil and gas won't guarantee their future forever. Their original power came from what lay beneath the ground. But the world is gradually, unevenly, and imperfectly moving away from fossil fuels. Still, clearly enough for Gulf leaders to prepare for what comes next. So they're trying to transform temporary energy wealth into permanent financial power. Oil becomes money. Money becomes assets. Assets become influence. Influence becomes protection. Now, let's shift from London to Redwood City, California. This is where Electronic Arts is headquartered. EA is one of the biggest names in Western gaming. For millions of people, EA isn't just a company. It's childhood, it's memories, and that's exactly why gaming matters. It isn't just entertainment anymore, it's culture, it's data, it's payment systems, it's online communities, it's millions of young people spending hundreds of hours inside digital worlds owned by private companies. Saudi Arabia understands that. For years, Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, PIF, steadily expanded its presence in gaming. It created Savvy Games Group to grow the kingdom's gaming and esports industry, and Savvy later announced plans to invest around $37.8 billion to turn Saudi Arabia into a global gaming hub. Initially, these looked like minority investments, a way to earn returns, diversify, and better understand the industry. Then, in 2025, the story became much bigger. EA announced a $55 billion agreement to be acquired by a consortium consisting of PIF, Silver Lake, and Affinity Partners. If the transaction is completed, EA would go private, public shareholders would be bought out, and the company would disappear from public stock markets. According to the company, the deal includes roughly $36 billion in equity and another $20 billion in debt financing arranged by JP Morgan Chase. This is where ownership becomes much more significant. Buying shares is one thing. Taking control is something entirely different. A minority investor can earn money. A controlling investor can shape the board, influence strategy, affect decisions around workers, and ultimately decide which products survive. And the EA transaction shows exactly why a leveraged buyout matters. A leveraged buyout sounds complicated, but the basic idea is simple. Imagine someone wants to buy a mansion. Instead of paying the full price themselves, they borrow a huge amount from a bank. But once the purchase is complete, the debt doesn't really stay with the buyer. It stays with the mansion. The mansion now has to generate enough income to repay the loan. That's essentially how a leveraged buyout works. A buyer acquires a company using a combination of equity and borrowed money. Once the deal closes, the company itself often ends up carrying much of that debt. Its future cash flow becomes part of the mechanism used to repay the loan. In this kind of transaction, debt isn't just an accounting figure. It can fundamentally reshape the financial pressure the company operates under. Think about an animator at a game studio in Los Angeles. He probably believes his job depends on whether the next game is good, whether fans enjoy it, and whether it sells. But after a debt-heavy takeover, that is no longer the entire story. His job can also become tied to interest rates, debt repayments, refinancing costs, and cash flow targets. The game still has to be good, but it also has to feed the debt machine. When a company carries heavy debt, management starts looking for quick savings. Layoffs become easier to justify. Smaller studios become more vulnerable. Risky projects are canceled. Creative experiments give way to safer franchises. The company becomes increasingly focused on predictable cash flow. This is not always because the new owner dislikes creativity. Sometimes it is simply mathematics. Debt has to be repaid. Repayment requires cash. Cash often leads to cuts. And when the company is part of a culture, the consequences are not just financial. They shape what millions of people watch, play, and experience. To understand why Gulf states are doing this, you first have to understand the fear driving the strategy. The Gulf is wealthy because of oil and gas, but that wealth comes with a deadline. The world is steadily trying to use less fossil fuel. For decades, oil and gas built the modern Gulf. They paid for highways, airports, ports, airlines, skyscrapers, universities, and entire cities that seemed to rise out of the desert almost overnight. But the same resource that made these states powerful also made them vulnerable. If your country depends heavily on a single export, and the world slowly moves away from it, your future becomes a race against time. Saudi Arabia calls its strategy Vision 2030. The UAE has transformed itself into a hub for aviation, finance, logistics, tourism, and technology. Qatar has used its gas wealth to build global investments, media influence, sport, and real estate. The same underlying goal: turn oil and gas wealth into something more permanent before the old model begins to fade. That is why sovereign wealth funds matter. They are not just investment funds, they are national insurance policies. For decades, much of this money moved quietly. Oil was sold. Dollars flowed in. Those dollars then flowed back into Western banks, Western bonds, Western companies, and Western real estate. This became known as petrodollar recycling. The Gulf gained stability. The West gained liquidity. Everyone benefited. Then came 2008. The global financial crisis changed the balance. Western banks were collapsing. Credit markets were freezing. Governments were panicking. Suddenly, many of the West's biggest financial institutions needed capital, and the Gulf had cash. During the crisis, sovereign wealth funds from the Gulf and Asia became major sources of capital for Western financial institutions. Qatar invested heavily in Barclays. Other sovereign funds took stakes in banks and financial firms under severe pressure. These were not donations. They were investments. But they taught an important lesson. When the West is stable, it talks about regulation, transparency, and national security. When the West is in crisis, it accepts the money. After 2008, Gulf capital was no longer just a passive holder of Western assets. It became a rescuer, a partner, a negotiator, and a source of influence. But buying strategic assets is not easy. Western governments have rules. In the United States, for example, CFIUS reviews certain foreign investments and real estate transactions to evaluate their impact on national security. Across Europe, governments have also become more cautious about foreign ownership of sensitive infrastructure, energy, data, and technology. So if a foreign government walks through the front door and tries to buy a sensitive company, regulators may block the deal. The front door is closely watched. So sovereign capital often takes another route, the side door. The side door is not illegal. That is exactly what makes it so effective. It looks professional. It uses major law firms, polished press releases, private equity language, and American or European partners. It uses phrases like consortium, co-investment, strategic partnership, and long-term capital. It does not appear to be a foreign government buying influence. It simply looks like finance. Rather than acting alone, sovereign wealth funds frequently partner with respected Western institutions, private equity firms, asset managers, banks, former officials, and investment platforms. These partners bring local expertise. They structure transactions. They speak the language regulators understand. They reduce political resistance. Most importantly, they give the deal a familiar face. The money may come from Riyadh, Doha, or Dubai, but the paperwork can flow through New York, London, or Silicon Valley. That does not mean every Western partner is controlled by Gulf states. These firms have their own incentives. They want fees, access to deals, and relationships with enormous pools of capital. But the result is the same. Sovereign money becomes much easier to accept when it is wrapped in Western finance. That is why this strategy works so well. It does not need to force its way into Western institutions. It simply moves through them. It buys into them, partners with them, sponsors them, funds them, rescues them, and gradually becomes harder to separate from them. It is a quieter form of power, but perhaps a more durable one. But money and lawyers alone are not enough. If you want lasting influence in the West, you also need the public. And one of the fastest ways to reach the public is through sport. In 2021, a PIF-led consortium acquired an 80% stake in Newcastle United in a takeover worth roughly £300 million. This is where the story becomes personal. For years, many Newcastle supporters felt trapped under the previous ownership. The club felt stagnant. The ambition had disappeared. The city was waiting for someone to make it believe again. Then, the takeover happened. Fans gathered outside St. James's Park. They waved flags, they sang, they celebrated as though the future had finally arrived. To human rights groups, this was sports washing. To many supporters, it felt like a rescue. Both views can be true at the same time. Football clubs are not ordinary businesses. They are identity. They are memory. They are family. They are traditions passed from father to son, mother to daughter, street to street, city to city. When a sovereign investor buys a football club, it does not simply acquire a team. It acquires emotional territory. That is why sport is so powerful. It does not require everyone to support the state. It only requires enough people to associate that state's money with their own happiness. If the team wins, the owner becomes part of the success story. If the city feels proud, criticism becomes more difficult. If politicians attack the money behind the club, fans may hear it as an attack on the club itself. That is not a legal shield. It is a human one. Golf became another example. Saudi Arabia's LIV Golf challenged the PGA Tour by offering enormous sums to the world's top players. What began as a breakaway league quickly turned into a battle over the commercial future of the sport. The lesson was clear. When the capital is large enough, even the oldest institutions are forced to negotiate. Sovereign wealth does not have to destroy Western institutions. It can invest in them, sponsor them, reshape them, and gradually force them to adapt. At some point, this story becomes too large to understand through a single building or one football club. You have to zoom out. Not Harrods, not the Shard, not Newcastle, not EA, not one airport stake, the entire system. The major Gulf sovereign wealth funds now control trillions of dollars in assets. Saudi Arabia has PIF, Qatar has the Qatar Investment Authority, Abu Dhabi has ADQ, Mubadala, and other state-backed investment vehicles. Kuwait has the Kuwait Investment Authority. Together, Gulf sovereign wealth funds manage around $5 trillion in assets, making them one of the largest pools of patient capital on Earth. Patient capital matters. Most investors think in quarters or years. Sovereign wealth funds think in decades. They can wait. They can absorb losses. They can buy during crises. They can invest in industries before they become profitable. They can make investments that are partly financial and partly strategic. Look at where the money is going. Airports, banks, real estate, football clubs, gaming, electric vehicles, artificial intelligence, renewable energy, luxury brands, semiconductors, logistics, food security, and data centers. These are the systems modern life depends on. Qatar Investment Authority has long been a major shareholder in Heathrow, and Saudi Arabia's PIF completed the acquisition of roughly a 15% stake in Heathrow's holding company in 2024. The old Gulf economy sold energy to the world. The new Gulf economy wants to own pieces of the world that energy built. And here is the twist. For decades, the West bought oil from the Gulf. The Gulf then used that money to purchase Western assets. Now, as the West tries to move beyond oil, Gulf capital is flowing into many of the industries expected to replace it. Electric vehicles, green hydrogen, solar power, artificial intelligence, data centers, and advanced infrastructure. The energy transition may not reduce Gulf influence. It may simply change its form. The fuel may change, the influence may remain. To be clear, this does not mean Gulf investment is inherently bad. Many of these investments create jobs. They fund infrastructure. They rescue struggling assets and support industries that Western governments and private investors often lack the patience or capital to build. A new airport terminal still benefits travelers. A football club with fresh investment still brings joy to supporters. A technology company backed by long-term investors can still build valuable products. The issue is not that foreign capital exists. The issue is what happens when state-backed capital becomes too important to refuse. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for our next interesting video coming soon. This is Kyle, and you are watching Beyond Economy.